guys, welcome back. This is the Above Average FPL podcast. My name's Adam, and as always, joined by Baker. Evening, mate. How are you?
Very well, mate. Monday night, day late.
Day late, but we're that's fine. You were busy yesterday.
I was at Spurs, and we got a guess because we probably be miserable if not.
That's true. That's true. And for anybody listening and not watching, you'll see that we've got the lovely John Mackenzie. John, how are you?
Yeah, I'm doing well. Here to perk you up. Who else to perk you up after a Spurs defeat than me, hey? But yeah, the options were watching Wolves versus West Ham or speaking to you guys. So you narrowly beat that fixture out.
We'll take it.
We'll take it.
We'll take it.
Small wins. Small wins.
How are you feeling after the game week's still going, Baker? How are you feeling like points wise?
Well, we both captain Palmer, so that worked out okay.
It worked out.
Treacherous men that we are.
It worked out in the end. Yeah, albeit Palmer wasn't my initial selection. Obviously, I selected Salah, but you know,
that's your moral high ground, is it?
My moral high ground is that I captained Salah and vice captained Palmer.
So I enjoyed it is that we streamed on Friday and Adam was like, I am not captaining a man against Spurs. I am not doing it. I'm not doing it. And then he found a loophole in that if he captained Salah, it would then move to his vice captain.
That wasn't the loophole. What actually happened is I actually went, you spoke about Fulham and I was like, well, we might be all right with Saka, which is just as bad. Let's just put it that way. And then when I looked at Understat and I was like, well, hold on. They've literally got the second best defense in the league, Fulham. I was like, okay, well, maybe I'll just switch it. Because at the time I was like, well, no, Tottenham have no centre-backs. So I thought it was okay to do it. And then
even when we did, it didn't matter.
It didn't matter. It didn't matter because he got 2 penalties.
Yeah. So the game's all right. John, when you last came on, you hated FPL. No, it's hated FPL too much. Thought we were weird. I
still hate
maybe.
FPL. Don't get me wrong. But I do play it, yeah, technically.
Technically. How is your debut world going? So you were doing a draft, only using the bottom 10 from last season teams.
Yeah, it's doing all right. I've been quite unlucky. In as much as like the guy who's in the top spot, I have 13 points total fewer than him, but we're doing head to head, so it's done in a way where you can play well against bad teams, I suppose, and then lose to good teams, and you end up with weird points totals. But yeah, I've done all right. I guess I've benefited a little bit from having a rough opening, so you then get the better picks from the pool when you're going through. But yeah, it's good fun. It makes the games that are, I suppose technically the Wolves West Ham game is an important game for our draft, although West Ham obviously aren't in the draft. But yeah, these sorts of games where you think there's nothing riding on it actually makes it quite fun. So I've quite enjoyed it. And
you're in.
Yeah. I've done the draft for a few years now, to be fair. This is the first time we've done it so restricted, and it definitely makes it more fun because there's very few players in the player pool worth having. So I've been experimenting a little bit this year with like being quite rotational, trying to use players in the pool because I think most people don't bother. So you can maybe game the system a little bit by sort of having a rotation of players who might do well in a game week, which is the standard that we're working with the players that we have might do well is pretty good. So yeah, it's good fun. I'd recommend it to FPLers who have got a friendship group and they need some kind of glue to stick them together.
I think in some ways, some players do kind of break out of the mold of the big players, and that's the stuff that keeps people even more interested, even on the main game as well. So it's not always just your Palmers and your Haalands, etc., that get people excited. It's the Kirkers and the Leif Davis and Cunha, those kind of guys.
The points from the guys that you don't necessarily expect, you enjoy more.
Yeah,
like you were very happy for me with my Mikalenko points last week.
I was fuming. Absolutely.
John's got Ashley Young in his draft. He's literally killing
Ashley
it
Young
for
is a
you.
great player to have. Yeah, I even switched him out for switched Branthwaite out for him because I figured Branthwaite was going to get the same amount of defensive points, but Young was probably slightly more likely to score. So, but yeah, he's doing well.
See, you're not so far from us, John, with that kind of thinking. Like, honestly, that's how
Exactly.
we think when we're looking at defenders. We do the same thing.
So there were some games.
There were some games. Let's have a quick look at. I just want to have a quick look at our scores very quickly, just as they are at the moment. Obviously, we've still got game being played. So I'm on 31 points, sort of. So I've got Sanchez 0-pointer, perfect. 2 0-pointers in a row from him. Lewis, Davis, Gabriel, Saka, Palmer, vice captain, Mitoma, Salah cap, Rogers, João Pedro, and Cunha. Wissa on the bench, João Pedro on the bench. Sorry, not João Pedro, Pedro Porro on the bench. 31 points. As far as anybody who doesn't take this game seriously is concerned, I've got 31 points. All my work mini leagues, 31 points. That's all I think I've got.
Yeah, but for the pro boys, John, this is what's known in the trade as bench wankery, where you deliberately place in your team players that are not going to play, knowing that they will auto sub out for players that will play.
And
so what's your real score?
So you can even do that with the captaincy, like I did here as well. Obviously, my real score's 59. So I'm on a small green arrow at the moment with Palmer. Obviously, getting me some points. Wissa getting me some points. Porro getting me some points. But yeah, not all bad. And Cunha right now, it's 0-0. So yeah.
What's the point of putting players on your team that aren't going to play? It's just to hide your score.
Makes just the illusion. Just an illusion of making it look like, because they'll sub out. So you put them in and you're like, so as I said, if someone just lazily looks at the app, they'll be like, oh, Adam's only got 31 points. And
then they'll wake up tomorrow morning. Yeah. The guys in the work league will wake up tomorrow morning and I'll have another 30 points on my team in one game. It'll look amazing. They won't know what's hit them. See, it's fun.
Ridiculous.
Whatever floats your boat, I guess.
Exactly. Go on, Baker. Talk.
I'm an upstanding citizen, so I don't do that. I'm always professional at all times. 69 points. Good old Bryan. Good old Bryan coming through when everyone sold him. No shots in 4 games, 5 games, where it was, and then pulls it out of the bag for us. So yeah, he's the hero. Other than that, Palmer cap, Isak, and I felt like I was going to get loads in that game. For about 5 minutes when Isak and Bryan scored, you were like, well, this is it. This is the big one. But yeah, another good week. And hopefully Ain't Nouri. I really need Ain't Nouri to not get booked tonight, because if he gets booked, he gets banned. And I've got issues because Greaves isn't playing. Lewis is now suspended. Gabriel, who knows? Who knows what he's doing with it? And Mikalenko's away at Arsenal. So I do not have many defenders. Please, please, please don't get a book. I'm sure the live chat will tell us if and when Ain't Nouri gets booked in this game. But yes, I am hoping.
And then just to follow on, wow, John, you've got a QR code over your face. Hold on a second, let's just move that out of the way. That's good planning. And for December, as always, we've got our Beat Baker competition over on Patreon. So if you want to join, you can join the Patreon. It's half price until Christmas. And all you have to do is beat Baker, live in the UK, and you've got a chance of winning a bottle of this wonderful Never Say Die bourbon. And as we said last time round, they've committed to a bottle every month until the end of the season. So shout out to Never Say Die for that. Amazing work from the guys there.
Where do you want to start?
We should start with some games.
Do we just start with Tottenham and get it done?
Let's go there. So I think
just sigh already.
Just sighed already. I think there's 2 kinds of responses as Spurs fans. And there's probably a third response actually that we probably need to take. The first one is obviously anger. The second one is just disappointment. And the third one is realizing maybe it wasn't as bad as it actually looks. because I think as much as like we gave up a lot of the ball, the penalties, outside of the penalties, they had a couple of good chances that Forster made saves for. Other than that, it was a lot of just tapping, a lot of just prodding, and they were fine. They were good, Chelsea, and they forced us to make, silly mistakes, and we do make our own mistakes anyway. But obviously they made that Cucurella makes 2 mistakes for the goals. But I don't think it's as bad as it looks at first glance.
I don't know, mate. I was there, and I didn't go. I mean, John can help us with some of the tactical stuff, but I guess I was literally like right behind where Cucurella was and the slips and so forth. But the thing that I think surprising, so obviously we pressed like in the final third, like 1-for-1, but it's quite tight in there, so it almost felt like 3-for-1. Like where I was just in front of me, when Cucurella gives up the first one, it was like Kulusevski, Porro, Johnson, and Sarr all within 10 yards of that ball almost. There's like so much there that even when we scored, I was like, I mean, if he didn't slip, there's 4 players just easily taken out with 10-yard passes, and you're like, and then we did it again, and I was like, well, this is great. Obviously, this keeps happening. It's good. But it was like that all game, that where you push, that you were like, and obviously it sat Bissouma on Palmer, which is fine if Palmer sits centrally, but he doesn't sit centrally. He sits to one side, and therefore, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people now are looking at like Enzo suddenly on the menu because he's like unbelievably cheap, as cheap as possibly can be. But one of the reasons why Enzo was so open all the time was because, well, Basuma wasn't going to stop any of his runs because he was over there. It felt a little bit like, when like Odegaard was there and Xhaka just kept getting through in that left 8 and nobody was there. It's because everyone's sort of pushing themselves over towards Odegaard. It did feel like every time they were going that way, it was going to result in problems. I guess my other thing of just watching us at the moment is because of that hard press, like everyone looks like they're about to get injured. At the end of the game, Porro looked, well, yeah, he was wincing. I'd be very interested to see he's in the squad on Thursday because he was wincing from just the number of times of having to try and get himself back. Obviously, Van der Ven, just before he went off, there was one where he sort of hobbled a little bit, and I was like, is Ange just literally killing them? But and that's not just will he injure them, but also in the big moments of stuff. So like, Solanke obviously misses the chance, and if you're watching highlights, you'll just see that obviously Solanke misses a chance. But if you was sitting in front of it, I've just watched that he's literally just pressed for 25 minutes, and then when you get to that moment, you're absolutely knackered all of the time. So when we ask for these little moments, we're so critical on them. Like we're be critical about the Basuma, the challenge, and all those bits of it. But when they're always gassed, it just felt like we were always going to do something stupid. And I just came away, I guess, from my side, not so much the fact that it was Chelsea that beat us, but almost the case of I don't really see where you go from that as being Ange, because if you're permanently just knackering your players, it's always going to be a slugfest, isn't it? Or you lose. John, come in, tell us what you think.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot to tease out there. In terms of it being a fairly balanced game, I mean, yeah, if you look at the XG plot, it looks pretty balanced. But I think the context plays into it, right? Part of the disappointment, I think, for Spurs fans will be basically being gifted 2 goals and then not being able to hold on to that. I mean, what was the second goal? 11 minutes or so. And yeah, then from then on, it's just sort of slowly letting Chelsea creep back into the game. The other thing I'd say is, I don't know, should we play a little quiz? Where did the XG come from? So I've got 3 columns. One of them is titled turnover, one of them is titled open play build up, and one of them is titled set pieces. You've got about 3 XG to play with. Where are you putting the balance of XG from each of these chances?
I mean, You've obviously got Son and Solanke's 2xG, two open play ones, which will be about one between them. But bar that, it looked like nothing from open play, really.
Yeah, then you've probably
Yeah.
got SARS header, which was probably about 0.2 from set
So,
pieces, and then you've got turnovers, which is the 0.2
well,
there, and then
I don't know if Son's counts as turnover or even Solanke's one counts as turnover, but I mean, it felt like a good XG of that was turnover stuff.
Yeah, so it's basically one XG in each column, but only 0.7 in open play build up. So, yeah, the Solanke chance, the big chance, came from a turnover from pressuring Sanchez, who then passed the ball to Sarr, and then they generated from that. And yeah, so what was that? That was 35 minutes. After that, they created one other chance from turnovers. So the press got significantly less dangerous as things went on, as time went on. In part, that's because Maresca changed the way that Chelsea were building up at one point and stopped gambling, going player for player with you guys. But yeah, in terms of the open play build up, I mean, yeah, there's the Son chance, which, if that had gone in,
we don't even
I
know
don't
if
know
it was
whether or not.
given.
Yeah, it may well have not been given. That's half of the open play build up chances. So
Yeah.
we're talking about Ange Postecoglou, whose one of his strengths is allegedly developing a build up system which is quite profitable. Hasn't proven to be so this season. And then 1.19 xG from set pieces. That's where most of the chances came from. Really, you've mentioned the Sarr one, that was a big chance, and then the goal itself came from a second phase from a set piece as well. So, yeah, it's a funny one. At the moment, to me, it feels like Spurs are they're almost quite like early Jurgen Klopp in that, like, they're using the out of possession as their biggest creator at the moment, and I think that's potentially quite worrying, especially when in this game Chelsea were able to respond to that by going less risky by just dropping an extra player into the build up. But yeah, it's a funny one for me. Like, the biggest issue here is like not being able to defend a 2-0 lead. And I think we can talk till the cows come home about the philosophy of like tactical trade-offs, but I think that's the worrying issue, that you can get a 2-goal lead so comfortably and then not really build on it, and just slowly cede away chances to the opponent. A bit unlucky. Lots of people talking about individual errors, but I think as well, part of the problem with this system that we're seeing in the Premier League is that I think that Postecoglou leaves a lot of space open for his players to make decisions, and generally in sort of defensive situations, right? So, I think we've seen that happen a lot in defensive transition. So players, because you're quite flexible in build up, your players end up all over the pitch. If you then lose the ball, you then end up in like non-specific defensive structures with players having to fill in different positions for their teammates, which like nominally is fine, but I think the problem is that there then becomes a lack of clarity about who should be where, when. And I think as a result of that, you then encourage the players to be decisive with their decision making. So you'll see, for example, Romero stepping out. There's a few examples of like Porro stepping out after a set piece, and again, like, it's fine. That's the principle. You're decisive. If you move, someone takes your space, and the principle works across the whole pitch. But the problem is that sometimes that leads to players doing things that are problematic. So sometimes you'll have players standing in the same positions in defensive structures, not really doing anything either way. There's been a few examples this season of players in dead space, standing next to teammates who are in dead space, and then the ball either being played over the top of them or the ball going round them and them not being in good positions. Centre backs being out of position a lot, because the narrowness of the build-up structure means when you lose the ball, the centre backs often have to pull wide, and then that raises questions like who drops in. Does the whole defence shift across? That's partly why you often end up with Porro on his own at the back post, because you're effectively playing with like a a three-man defence with one of the centre-backs pulling right across, so you'll have Porro around the penalty spot line. Happened again yesterday, I suppose, for the Enzo Fernandez goal, which again, yeah, it's fine, it's lucky, like it's a shot that deflects perfectly to him. Porro should definitely have done better there, I think.
Basuma hangs a leg, but again,
yeah.
I think so many of the actions almost were at the end of, you've just printed a load of yards. You're just you're not in position to start with. So everyone will be like, "Oh, it looks terrible, the Basuma hanging on the leg." But you're like, he was never in the position to get himself back into it, because they're firefighting all the time. And Chelsea are good. Like they were the better team. They were the better team. Like in flesh, I went yesterday with the guy I was with. It was such an Everton fan type stuff, but he was, he didn't come away saying I was impressed with Tottenham. He came away, I was really impressed with. I mean, and Palmer in particular was just a joke footballer.
Yeah, and but I think again, like comparing Chelsea with Spurs is interesting, because in many respects, what Maresca has done is just given them like a structure that they're working in. So they play this 3-box-3 shape pretty much invariably. They form the box in different ways, which gives them sort of tactical advantages. So you saw that switch at half time, going from Caicedo inverting from the right into the pivot to Cucurella inverting from the left into the 10 slot to have Enzo slightly deeper. You're playing the same system there, but you're getting different personnel into different positions, and those kind of dynamics change the tactical flow of the game as well. It's not like rocket science, and a lot of the time, the structure is a bit too basic, and I think we're going to start seeing in time that Chelsea will struggle against teams who low block against them, because usually in those situations the structure like falls down a little bit. You need to have a little bit more guile in the final third when that happens. Which isn't to say that I don't think that this system will evolve. I think it will. I think Maresca's been pretty smart in just setting a system up which is basic, knowing that the players that he has are good enough that they don't need structural solutions to be good all the time. So what you do is you put them into the shape, and you try and create space for Cole Palmer, for example, and against different teams you'll do that in different ways. So they've done that with Palmer and Madueke on the right, two left-footed right wingers last season. But again, using Madueke almost as a way of creating space around Palmer to make him more dangerous, to give him those pockets of space that he can be so dangerous from. And then, if it's not working, you have different options of players you can bring on, different rotations you can use to get into the shape, but you're still operating in the same structure. You're dropping into the same defensive structure, and it just gives you a level of consistency that I think great players just thrive on. So I think he's done a really good job in that respect. And I think I've mentioned all of that by comparison to what you see with Spurs, which is the fluid rotations in principle are great, but actually they're not producing particularly great build-up play at the moment. Teams know how to nullify them, and that fluidity in possession is leading to a fluidity out of possession, which is actually unhelpful. So I think the comparison between Maresca and Postecoglou was pretty stark, which isn't to say that I don't think that Postecoglou is a good manager. I absolutely do think that, but I think without evolving somewhat, the system that Spurs have in place at the moment has stagnated quite a bit. Teams know how to play against it. Teams know how to cause the problems, and at this level, against these kinds of players, you do get punished for these little inaccuracies in positioning and particularly in defensive situations.
Yeah, I think Chelsea have obviously got that benefit that, I mean, as you say, they don't necessarily have to. They don't even necessarily have to amend their structure when they're making the changes, because you look around at most clubs and you have a strong 11, maybe 12, maybe 13. And you fit players in and around, and you maybe shift a player around, and it changes the system slightly to add an extra attacker or something like that. Whereas Chelsea can just literally add another guy that was one. It's like watching on FIFA when their energy just goes down and down and down, and then you just add the same guy that can do the same job but at 100%, and now he's playing against defenders that are at 50%. So even if it's kind of working, but you just need like a bit of fatigue in there. He can throw in. Like yesterday, obviously he benches Madueke yesterday, and then just brings him in. that's absolutely fine. It just brings in João
brings
Felix.
Jacko off. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, brings all these guys.
Yeah, Jackson off and Kunku on. It's just very, very simple. I mean, I don't know whether the Lavia substitution had anything to do with the Kulusevski incident either, but it was
after
just
the game. Maresca said it was he tweaked his hamstring, so he was making out that it was unrelated to that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, like you say, in that situation, you can just bring on. You can just use Caicedo in the middle with
just
Fernandes.
Use Caicedo
and it's like,
as the
here we are.
£120 million midfielder that he is. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think from an FPL perspective, the defence for Chelsea, though, I'm not a big fan of. I still think they will concede chances in that formation. You were able to see how easy it was to get down the sides, even the Sun chance. I know, it ends up offside, but where you play that 3-box-3, there is room to get round it. That was definite to see. Jackson, I mean, early on, he was a great outball, Jackson. So, but because it was like 5v5 in one half and 5v5 in the other half, he wasn't really getting in behind. He was sort of just stretching and pulling everyone wide. So it wasn't a good. I think a lot of people thought this would be a really good game for Nico Jackson. I thought he actually did a good job, but I didn't feel like it was a good FPL option for him this week as it was. Palmer's just Palmer.
Yeah, I never felt comfortable watching Van der Ven have to sprint alongside Jackson every single time as well. No. That never made me feel comfortable. I mean, having to actually start those two felt like it was born out of necessity rather than anything. Really did. And I've seen in chat already someone, Maggot, saying that Romero's out for 6 weeks, which they've said is an unrelated thing, although came immediately as he does a Cruyff turn in his own box, which was just stupid. But
yeah,
it is. I've got Sanchez in goal now. I mean, I've got now Sam Johnson who's starting. So who's starting again? So I mean, Wolves have got Southampton. Wolves have got Ipswich. This weekend coming up. Might be the way.
But Chelsea's run's good for a long time. Like it's not a terrible thing having. I'd rather have Sanchez probably than have say a Colwill or something like that, because I feel at least you're always going to get saves. I'm just not sure how many times you can get the clean.
What's the rule on goalkeepers in FPL? What's the meta? Is it save money on them by getting high save?
Yeah, so he's quite cheap. You get more saves and more bonus basically if they clean, if you've got busy ones, or you can spend a bit more. Like I've got Raya, and it's like, well, it kind of either gets 2 points for conceding 1 goal, or he gets 6 points. Well, let's do Arsenal. Let's on that plan, and you'll be able to see that. We'll
do that. There's just a very quick question while we're on Chelsea. Matt's asking: are either of us considering Enzo?
The point is on Enzo is that for me he's comfortably the best at that price.
Yeah.
So I think it's an Ahmad or Enzo price. Well, Enzo is absolutely 100% nailed and good. So it would be me, comfortably. I have no issue with it, but he needs to be your 8th attacker, and you have to be comfortable then if Rodgers, for example, your 7th attacker, that you also want to play him loads too.
Yeah. Fulham v Arsenal, then. Obviously.
So if we're playing the same game, John, that you were playing earlier, how much of because I've seen this everywhere today, is how much of the open play, how much of the 2 point whatever it is XG for Arsenal was open play?
Yeah, there was
0.3, is it?
It was poor, wasn't it? Arsenal really interesting at the moment because everyone is talking about consistency of set pieces, but I just refuse to believe they're a team that can only create 0.3 open play XG against a team who are sitting in. Right, clearly, right. There's 2 chances there in the whole 90 minutes. That rate of return is embarrassing for a team that have spent £600 million on players under Arteta and have seemed to have gone in the wrong way. And I guess the way that I rationalise this is that there's 2 things you can do as a football manager. You can sort of lean into variance and say variance exists. So the best thing to do is to try and make variance as uncostly as possible. And I think that the way that you do that is by trying to score as many goals as you can. Because then, the more goals there are in a game, the less valuable goals are technically. And that means that you should be able to ride variance a little bit better. But if you spend your time trying to reduce the variance in games and reduce the amount of goals in games, the problem is that your like variance becomes super costly, like it was in this game, right? It's one chance for of very low value, obviously really nicely taken by Raul Jimenez, but that's the point, right? In the Premier League, these teams have players who can do that to you, at the even at that level, and so if you aren't able to generate enough from open play and you're relying on set pieces, yeah, sure, it seems to be like a fairly consistent way of scoring for them. I don't doubt the consistency of their set piece product, but it's the issue I have is that, you know, the only thing you can guarantee in football is that you'll get open play. You can't guarantee the amount of set pieces you're going to have, and you can't guarantee that you won't just have a game where those set pieces don't come through for you, and then that's when the variance bites you. So yeah, it's the issue isn't whether or not Arsenal are a good team. They're a good team. The issue isn't whether or not the set pieces are consistent enough. Clearly they are. The issue is whether or not this style of play can have you winning consistently enough to challenge at the top of the table. And I think if they don't challenge for the title this season, which, you know, as Liverpool march on is looking increasingly difficult for them to do, then it represents I think a real failure for the Arsenal project, right? This is the season where they sort of reaching their final form, and City have fallen away, first time in however many years, and they're not the ones to actually take advantage of it, despite being in the situation that they're in. And it's for me, it sort of represents that Arteta has turned too much towards this reduction of variance approach, rather than trying to think, how do we improve ourselves to the extent that you have to accept those trade-offs, right? It's why I always say to Arsenal fans got really excited when I proclaimed them 2 years ago the greatest out of possession team in the world, and I said, that's not your job as an elite team to be the best out of possession team in the world. Your job as an elite team is to have and I don't buy the adage, by the way, that defenses win you championships. All that you need to do is have a defense which is good enough for your attack to win you a championship. That should be the principle. And I think that Arsenal have maybe lent too far in the opposite direction. And it's sort of coming back to bite them at the moment. So yeah, fun stuff from Arsenal. And I think this game sort of typifies everything that everyone talks about with them at the moment.
15 game weeks, 3 times they've done 1 XG of open play. That's not a lot, is it?
That's what we were seeing on socials earlier on. Though, in like the last 8 games, only Southampton are worse than them for open play XG.
It's so reliant on it, which, like you say, also then you look at it and you're like, well, who are the picks? Well, the picks are centre backs
and
Saka. And like you say, I'd Rice if that was your poison to go to, but the others are so good, that you wouldn't. It does make it. I'm a Raya owner, and I'm like, well, if they're so leaning into set pieces, what chance have I got of being the one that's going to get the bonus, to get the saves, any other stuff there? It feels like a complete waste to spend more extra money on Raya. If I could, I wouldn't mind getting out of it. It's just wherever you go on the keepers at the moment, it's a bit painful. Look, if Saka's goal was just onside, Saka's got another 10-pointer and more, and everyone says he's brilliant again. But it's reliant on very small moments on that. I think it just makes Saliba, Timber, Gabriel just great picks, really. On Fulham, I thought Fulham's grounds. I think it's like for you, John, who's the out of possession porn for you, is the camera angle is quite cool to watch the out of possession stuff. And I thought what was really interesting was what basically Iwobi continually changing it from 4-4-2 to 5-3-2 by just moving to right back. It was like a continually, he just controlled the press of, we're in their half, we'll go 4-4-2, it drops back, I'll just drop the 5-3-2. Seemed really simple, like for how, like, watching, obviously being at Spurs, I watched the Arsenal Fulham game in the ground, and you can't hear the commentary, so you're just watching it. And I was like, it's really nice watching that shape of just change up, change down, change up, change down. And then I got to watch our chaos and was like, this isn't fun.
Yeah, I think as well the interesting thing about what Fulham did is that they recognised that Arsenal are so dependent on that right hand side, right? So they overloaded on that side, forced them to the left, and yeah, Arsenal really struggled from that point of view. And I think that's going to be what happens, right? The Premier League is so unforgiving as a tactical league. Is all the analysts know what's what. They know how to cause problems. So yeah, that overload, making sure that you're doubling up on Bukayo Saka, making sure you're tracking Erdogan as well. Between those two things, you're then essentially saying, fine, go around the other way and see what you can do with, Declan Rice as an interior. It's just not going to be as dangerous. And so, yeah, I think teams are going to start doing this more and more as well, which is going to make, I suppose, the Arsenal attackers less valuable.
It's interesting. It makes it very hard to cap Saka at the moment for me. Very hard.
He's still got those set pieces, right? And then that is the big money item, and when he's still going to have shots, so he's still going to pick up the bonus when he's registering all these shots on target, etc.
I saw an argument that basically this is Arteta's defence ways, that they have so much sustained pressure that it enables them to have more set pieces. Therefore, that's why they're so good at set pieces. But you're like, yeah, probably could just do with creating a few more chances.
There's got to be a point where there's got to be somebody that's going to be looking at all of these set pieces and has got to come up with some kind of counter to them, right? I think people were talking over the weekend about like NFL style, or we've spoken about it before, like NFL style set plays, special plays, whatever you want to call them. And so defensive coaches, like, this is like the era of like the attacking set piece coach seems to have come in. You feel like you have a set piece coach. That's what that's what people call them, set piece. They're not really set piece. They're attacking set piece coaches. That's what they are. They're developing plays where people are trying to cause problems in opponents' boxes. And I think you need to have somebody who's thinking on the other side of that box as to how movement might work. And Arsenal, weirdly, in the last couple of weeks, the setup feels very repetitive. So there might be ways and means in which they can cause them problems. I think Fulham did okay, apart from obviously the Saliba one, which is like, you get one wrong and you probably concede, and that's obviously the big problem. But I think outside of that, I think generally speaking, they did okay from defending their set pieces.
The three big chances are all set pieces, right? So you've got the Williams-Saliba one in the first 5 minutes, and then you've got the Saka one. Sorry, the Saliba one. The one that he scored, and then you've got the Thomas Partey one, which is the one around 70th minute,
where he put it wide or something.
Yeah, he managed to get completely free. They do that thing, don't they, where they start off the back post and they rush the front, and often players will get lost in that movement, and he got free and popped one in. I don't know if you saw the clip of Traore easing Saliba out of play from one of them, because that seems to me to be the obvious thing, right? It's like the sort of gamble that Arsenal seem to be making at the moment is that those kind of pressures aren't being given as fouls, and so they're able to, it's not only manipulate through movement, they're able to manipulate by blocking, which is essentially just shoving without sort of like hard contact. And that was essentially what Traore did. And I don't know whether or not it's because teams are more worried about the trade-off that you get there, because obviously if you foul someone in the build-up when you're taking a set piece, it's like, oh, we don't get the goal, but we might not have got the goal anyway. And if you do, you're probably going to get it anyway at the moment. Whereas I suppose the other way around, if you're perceived to foul the opponent, you're giving away a penalty, which is not what you want to do either. But it seems to me that is the way of starting to cause problems here, is just blocking the Arsenal players the same way that they try and block goalkeepers when they're doing their back post rush and trying to just destabilize them as much as possible. But I think the problem with that as well is that you're still in danger of giving up chances even if you do that. If you focus so much on blocking their runners, there's going to be the players who come from deep anyway, and they'll change something up at some point. But I suspect that's the way to start thinking about it, trying to find ways of just blocking them, even if you've got like a wall of blockers to stop them from getting through, and see how they deal with it. But yeah, it's a tough one.
To one of set pieces, West Ham have just scored one against Wolves. Suchek's managed to lob basically Sam Johnston from a back post header.
Chris Woody.
Yeah,
Chris
yeah,
Woody.
yeah. Very similar. Oh,
Nice
The other
segue.
thing
Good work.
nice segue. We can.
Well, I was just going to say before we move on from the set pieces, that part of the problem with Arsenal is that the reason why they're so hard to defend from set pieces is because they built a team who are good at set pieces, right? In part, that's why they're bad in open play because
Yeah.
that's
Big lads.
there is that trade off, and I know it's not as simple as just that. It's not like the better you are at set pieces, the worse you are in open play, but that does seem to be the way that it's gone, and so it's about getting the balance of these trade offs right, and it seems as though it's not quite right at the moment. So I do feel for teams having to try and stop them from scoring set pieces because they have sort of lent into that, and the Tony Pulis tongue-in-cheek analogy that's made is sort of fair because you end up with these scenarios where you create a team where actually you don't need to be incredible at build-up. You just need to be consistently getting the ball into wide areas and then slinging in crosses, right? If you've got the players who can exploit that. And then you end up with this scenario which is what a lot of people talk about, I think, where you're more likely to win set pieces because you're putting under pressure in those wide areas where you either get deflections out for corners or you win free kicks, and then you have the players to be able to exploit it. And so, yeah, I don't mean to dismiss the process entirely, but it just seems to me that they have too many of these games where if it doesn't go right, it goes wrong, and that becomes an issue, I think.
FPL Lard says Arsenal Stoke, just as you were literally saying that. Just as you were saying
I
that.
hate saying that because it's in part it's almost like a lazy analogy, but that's why I find it such a funny approach, because essentially what's happened is taken that model of play, which is often used by teams who don't have the money to be able to challenge at the top, and said, what about if we injected money into this approach and see where we go with it? Whereas as I've said before, my sense of it is that if you have the money to be able to buy elite attackers, just buy elite attackers, lean into your attack. Don't worry as much about your defense, because that approach is going to be less costly variance wise than the other one. So yeah, it's definitely fun having a coach doing something so unique as this, but I still remain unconvinced as to the sort of meta justification for it.
Moving on.
United
2, Forest 3. What are your takes here, boys?
I am a bit confused. I would say so well done, Forest, as a starting point. I'm not confused at all with Forest. I think I know exactly where the players are going to play, what they're going to do. Even when the subs come on, I kind of know what they're going to do too. The bit I'm with Amorim, we're really early days, but when we're thinking from an FPL perspective, we're trying to work out, well, where are they fitting in that system? I guess when you're Bruno Fernandes, because he's still getting points and so forth, is Bruno's good. Bruno's the one that you can kind of trust in that team, so therefore he's the pick if you're desperate to go and have some Man United guys. But the rest of them, I'm not sure it's going to end up where it is at the moment, is because for me, it's just lots of people that don't feel like they're quite in the right position. Like Ahmad is playing right wing back, which if you've got a right wing back, you kind of want the guys inside it to be like, well, if he's going to play more on the wing, do I have some cover for it? But you played Kobe Mainoo and Ugarte, and they both spent a lot more time on the left than they did towards the right. They didn't look like they were trying to cover at all when he went forward. It all looked like, well, just get in there whenever I want. I don't know. You play Dalot on the left as left wing back, but he's obviously not left-footed at all. Mazraoui, who's been incredible, I think, for them, ends up on the bench. Then every game we're doing these 50-odd minute subs, and I'm like, it just feels very confusing for me quite a lot. And then you obviously take Bruno off even relatively early. I know you've got to try and feel your way into it, and you haven't had a pre-season and you're doing stuff, but I just feel very confused.
Is the whole double centre-back, because it was a double centre-back change again?
Yeah.
After 65, it's just pure centre-backs in, centre-backs out. Is that something that he did at Sporting at all? I'm asking you, John. You look
I
at
have
more
no
football.
idea, to be
No,
honest with you. But it is something that Erik ten Hag did, right?
Yeah.
And the argument I think was always
And Van
given was,
Nistelrooy's done it. Even at Leicester, he did it.
yeah, I mean, the argument that's always been given is that the players aren't fit enough, which, yeah, I don't know whether or not that's still the issue here. But yeah, I guess Manchester United stocks are down in FPL because it seems as though Amorim's going like highly rotational, right? So I guess you're in a sort of Pep Guardiola situation of not knowing who's going to play each week, right? Which I suppose changes the meta a little
Does.
bit.
It does. It does. Well, it makes Bruno still okay because, like you say, but if you knew Bruno was like close to the far end of the pitch, involved in stuff regularly, then he's cheap, really. 8 million for him is one of the cheapest he's been since his first season. And if we knew it was all good, then you'd be like, well, I just need Bruno in my team. The run's pretty good. If we knew that Ahmad was definitely playing every game, then you'd be like, well, he's unbelievably cheap.
He's made for that position as well in many respects, I think, like
Yeah,
running from deep into space because yeah, those structures always sort of open out space in those wide areas, right? And
yeah.
a lot of the build up is designed to build up until you can't build up centrally anymore, and then hit those channels if needs be. And yeah, he's looked pretty dangerous there, hasn't he?
I think Ahmad actually, though, even if he wasn't playing right wing back, playing right, he can play at right wing as well. So I don't think Ahmad's actually particularly a particular minutes risk. But I do look at it and say, well, Euro's come back and now he's playing right centre back, and then also they've got Mazraoui leaving us. And we've also got Dalot there who's playing on the wrong side. And what happens even in January, he's only around the corner. If they go on a left wing back, does Dalot go back over there? All of these things are like, for me, it's just Bruno or none, really.
yeah,
The only positive on Ahmad is that he has a couple of good fixtures coming up, which is when Rodgers hasn't got particularly good fixtures. So if you wanted to balance Rodgers and Ahmad out, but that's the positive on Ahmad.
yeah. You've definitely got. I mean, I can't see him pushing into. I can't see him pushing any further forward though. He doesn't need to push any further forward in terms of the team because essentially, I mean, he's not. Amorim's not playing with like a front four. It's definitely like a front 3+2 supporting acts, and Ahmad's causing
he's not at the moment
most of that.
But
is that so great? Because I'm just trying to work out whether Højlund is the right forward for that particular.
Højlund this week, Xerxes last
Exactly.
week.
I think he's still
before
trying to
that
work
week,
out.
it's like,
But is
that's what I'm
he
saying,
the
all
right
of it's
profile
like
of
trying to
player
work
as
it
well?
out.
It's just
Rashford's been up there.
yeah, but then Rashford's not the right player for that. I mean, just because, like, if there's anyone, if you're going to be drilling crosses in from the sides as well, I mean, you need somebody who's got the ability to head the ball or be, agile enough to get back for a cutback. I guess Rashford probably okay there, but there's zero aerial threat, so there's no option, and you end up a little bit one-dimensional going forward. So,
But what I'm saying is, right, I'm not trying to just, like, I'm not sure lots of people are buying Ahmad at the moment, and obviously he's got like 5 assists in like 5 games, whatever it is. So I'm not saying it's bad, but I am saying is there's no reason to suggest he won't keep his place, but nobody can say they know it right now.
yeah.
Like, you can't say you know it. Like, everyone's like, oh, he's there, that's him forever. Like, they just lost back-to-back games, and he's a new manager. If they keep conceding, for example, we might go, oh, maybe I'll play this Mazraoui or this Dalot at right wing back occasionally. And maybe when you need him, he ain't there.
Yeah.
And you've got to transfer someone to go to him. And I'm like, do you really want to spend your transfers there? That's why, for me, like, if you said Enzo Fernandez or Ahmad, I'd just be like, I love Enzo Fernandez, thanks.
Yeah.
That just, like, I feel like it's like I want a fancy pick, do you know what I mean? And I have Ahmad and stuff, but just have Enzo Fernandez. Because if you're relying on playing him every week, then there's probably other problems.
Yeah. How did you feel when the Chris Wood goal went in? Like, okay, 2 things. How did you feel firstly when it went in, and then secondly, how did you feel when you watched the goal?
Well, when it went in, I was like, Chris Wood's inevitable. I sold Chris Wood for Isak last week, John. But when it went when they scored a third time, I was like, well, it can't not be Chris Wood. It's got to. But then when you actually see both the Gibbs White goal and then you see that goal, you're like, what are they doing?
I also
Like,
have Chris Wood in my draft.
beautiful.
I switched him for Jimenez as part of a bigger deal where I actually feel as though I probably got the raw end of the deal, but
Look at
yeah,
you
hopefully
trading.
he keeps on scoring. But yeah, it's Forest's a little bit of a mystery to me in many respects. Like they are pretty passive in certain phases. I thought they made it pretty easy for Man United in terms of build up in this game. I thought United looked quite good. At least promising in terms of build up. I know that people overrate that sort of stuff probably a bit too much. Maybe sometimes a bit gimmicky in build up. So, repeated ideas that I think once teams cotton on to, they'll try and make it harder for them that sort of thing to happen. But you'll probably have seen the third man combinations or the up back and throughs as people call them, where you sort of bounce it off one of your tens or your striker into a pivot player who's being covered, so that they're then you find them behind the cover so they can then run forward. That sort of thing is going to happen quite a bit, and then you've got the option, as I said before, of like either trying to progress centrally or if you have no options, pinging it into wing backs running in wide areas, trying to get into space in that way. So yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to see what level this sort of plateaus out at, because I think basically that he's a sort of high floor manager. I think once the players get used to the system, they'll be decent. The question is, what happens when they start plateauing at a certain level and it doesn't seem to be high enough to achieve the goals that they want to achieve. That's when things are going to be interesting. But yeah, again, it's fun having another manager who's
Sure.
it's maybe pushing out of the sort of strictures that people often see within elite football, but like no one's been playing a consistent back three this season apart from Oliver Glasner. We've seen it a couple of times from Thomas Frank, who's obviously very flexible, but there's very few coaches in the elite game, to be honest, who are using back threes consistently. And then one of those is Xabi Alonso, who, most of the time his team are playing out of a back four anyway in possession. And I will say this, that like the coaches, the best coaches who use back threes are always trying to find ways of not being in a back three when their team are playing. So I think that back threes are incredibly useful for elite teams if you've got the flexibility to be able to move around and benefit yourself from those sorts of movements. So like I guess Simone Inzaghi is like the classic example of a guy who's used a back three system, and now they know this so well they can implement all of these flexible rotations and both in and out of possession, right? Because the beauty of a back three / back five is that you technically have like an outside centre back on each side who should be free to jump out without leaving your back line completely open. So yeah, there was some really. The game I always go to is the Champions League final, City versus Inter, where Inter were able to sort of cover the half space players that City have with their outside centre backs jumping up on the ball side when there was any sort of danger present. So I think it'll be fun having Ruben Amorim implementing some of those things in the Premier League.
It just needs to get through to a bit of a break. The next 3 weeks is a huge amount of games.
Yeah.
Right. Let's. I thought we were going to get a nice little segue to Brentford. There, you mentioned Thomas Frank, so I think we could go there.
That's a nice segue, isn't it?
Yeah, let's do that.
or we could have gone from the fullback to fullback segue because
Ooh.
Ait Nouri has just assisted Matt Doherty. So there we go. But
Just
we can go.
Don't get booked, Ait Nouri. Don't get booked.
Just don't get booked. He hasn't been booked yet. Bryan Mbeumo. Gone.
Yeah, the guy that FPL accounts can't stop talking about.
That's it. That's exactly it.
Can you give us the lookalike pose, like it's on the screen?
My beard isn't long enough to do it, but what was it? It was more like
something like that.
It's pretty good.
It's pretty good.
Pretty good.
It's pretty good. Check out the thumbnail. You'll see how close it is. Yeah, I mean, to be fair, this was Brentford obviously don't create as many clear chances in this game. I thought that they were still fine. It was a bit odd to see like they're not starting with Damsgaard, but is it Yarmouk? Is that his name?
Yeah.
Thought he was great.
Damsgaard and Sharda out the 11
And
after a
Sharda.
hat trick.
Yeah. And then interestingly, obviously we get the season's gone by Mbeumo up top when Wissa goes off.
Yeah.
As well when Sharda comes on.
Almost a little goal at the end would have been a delight.
Oh, what when he misses basically an open goal? Dan Burn clears it off the line.
Dan Burn clears off the line, yeah.
Yeah. So, a goal and assist from Mbeumo, and Wissa gets something. Wissa gets a goal that he doesn't usually score. Doesn't normally get chances that small. Doesn't normally take them. But
he was good, Wissa.
But yeah,
like continually good.
Yeah,
not just that, but obviously he almost got. I think it would have been an own goal, the one start half time.
Yeah. The one
and then
Nick Pope.
Got a lot of chances. By the way, Bowen's just scored 2-1.
Fuming.
So those that went Mbeumo to Bowen, it worked out fine for them. It worked out fine for them.
He got an assist as well, did he, for the goal, I assume?
Yeah.
It was a corner.
Gordon didn't start. I did notice there's Neil, the scout who does the scout predictions, had said that recently that he's been quite fatigued, potentially carrying a bit of an injury. So, but I thought Barnes and they've got Barnes and Murphy, haven't they? Which is pretty good.
Barnes is a consistent off the bench and score kind of guy as well, doesn't he?
Yeah.
Murphy's just like your 7 out. So Murphy seems just like your 7 out of 10 guy, doesn't he? He always seems to crop up with some kind of.
Oh man, he's got a cross on him.
And like Brentford afforded them so much space in the box that, I mean, he was always going to get a chance.
What do you make of Newcastle, John? We find them very hard to read in terms of consistency and trying to work out what's the deal.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I've not watched much Newcastle this season, truth be told. My observations of Eddie Howe's Newcastle were that he burst onto the scene playing kind of early Jurgen Klopp stuff, so heavy out of possession stuff, getting a lot of your edge through being physical, turnovers, having direct attacks. But I think it's pretty clear that they were quite reliant on Kieran Trippier for a lot of their chance creation. And since I think the way that they were pressing got found out, that dropped off a little bit as well. So that's sort of how I'm reading them. But yeah, it seems as though with all of the PSR stuff as well, they've not been able to consistently bring in the kinds of players that they wanted. But yeah, again, it's like any of the things we've been talking about tonight, right? It's like if you rely too much in one area on something, then if that area stops being as productive as it has been, then it spells trouble for Premier League sides. And it's hard to know what you do with that squad, right? Other than playing fairly aggressive, out of possession heavy stuff. Despite the fact that they've got a few standouts like Guimaraes or Isak. I think the problem is that they do rely too much on, I wouldn't say moments, but like a few individuals to get a lot of their upside in possession, and it's clearly not really working out very well for them at the moment.
Adam, you got Lewis Hall in your team.
Yeah,
I'm looking at potentially Lewis Hall in my team, in that I have to buy a defender because I've got no defenders, and obviously he's got a couple of good fixtures in the next couple of weeks. I mean, but are you worried positionally? Like
a little bit. I mean, he was atrocious for the Mbeumo goal. His positioning was, he was so far behind the rest of his team when the ball came through to Mbeumo, and then he just allowed him inside into a place where he's in a position of strength, and Hall was never going to even lay a glove on him. So that, I'm talking about one specific moment there, but thought defensively he just wasn't fantastic. The Barnes goal comes from his area of the pitch as well. It's kind of like left centre back.
Yeah.
But left back's in there anyway. it didn't feel great. And it pisses me off that he stands at every set piece and lets Bruno G take them. Like every single time, he stands there, he runs up to it and then stops or runs over the top of it.
Yeah,
like, just take the fucking free kick.
I mean,
please.
just in general, it's passive in play. Like I felt there was a lot of times where it was like, oh,
it is frustrating. Look, I don't hate having him in there at all. I'm not in a rush to make any kind of defender moves, but it's just kind of. I've got no issues in benching him if I need to. You know, I've got this now problem where it's like Leif Davis or injured Gabriel or suspended Rico Lewis or Lewis Hall. So it's like, well, Lewis Hall's got to play at the moment.
Oh, you've got him, so you have to play him the next few games. It's just about
I'm not sure if he's
him,
buy, though.
Yeah, I mean, if we got any Newcastle guys, watch this. I'd be very interested to know how close Botman is, and if Botman's back, like, does Burn go back to left back? Because obviously, but Howe loves Burn, like, loves him. And is that part of the problem? I think sometimes with the Newcastle ones is that, you know, previously it was really kind of like three centre backs, and then Trippier would spam crosses, wouldn't he, to stuff. But now it's Livramento and Hall, and is that too much from fullback, which then makes them just
doesn't feel like
easier to play against. But
it's Leicester, Ipswich next to tough 3 games. Although Villa at home probably is going to be okay for them.
You don't mind it.
And I mean, Spurs they'll concede, and United they'll probably concede as well. But then they've got a nice little run of 4 fixtures: Wolves, Bournemouth, Southampton away, and then Fulham at home. So three of those home games. I think it's fine to have him, and I don't mind a buy. I don't think it's a forced buy though. I don't think it's like a rush into it. Kind of, I need a Newcastle defender. I mean, there's not many teams where I'm saying like you need this defender.
To be fair, for me, it'd probably replace Greaves. I'd probably have him as a 5th defender. I don't think you should be buying him as a 3rd or 4th defender, but I do think he could be a 5th almost.
Yeah, I don't mind that.
Then we'll take Mbeumo. Obviously, people are selling him. I'm probably going to keep him. Having watched Chelsea, as I said, I still think I wouldn't be surprised. You know, obviously we know he likes to do a bit of 3-5-2 against the bigger teams and at Stamford Bridge. I kind of expect it to be Wisdom and Mbeumo up top against Chelsea. I'd be surprised if it's not. Ayer and Roaslev were both back on the bench, and they can both play right wing back.
It's worth noting as well that Brentford are putting up pretty good attacking numbers this season. So a higher XG than Brighton, Man United, Fulham, teams of that ilk. Nottingham Forest, obviously, but yeah, it's kind of I think it was Nick Miller, one of my colleagues, wrote a piece that was like, how did Brentford get rid of their best attacker and get better, right? But I think a Brentford attacker is probably worth. I've actually got Damsgaard in my team, and he's been fantastic as well. But I think they're going to be a bit more rotational in there now that they've got a few players back. But yeah, I think Mbeumo, Wissa, I've got Wissa in my team as well, and he's been making hay when he's not been injured. So definitely the way forward. If you're in a shit FPL draft like me, where Brentford are amongst the best players, which may not apply to many of your listeners, so I apologise for that. But I think I've been impressed with their ability to just generate goals in lots of different ways. Brentford, like again, it's the fine margin stuff, right?
It's weird because I mean, like, how much weight do you put on home and away? I know it's difficult to. You'd like to think that there's not that much weighting, and then I know Thomas Frank was asked on Match of the Day, like, why can you not do this away from home? And he's like, I don't know.
They've scored 5 goals away from home, I think.
It's ridiculous. So,
they've got.
Yeah, like
24, 26, I think. Yeah,
26 at home. It's literally mad. But at what point do we start in our minds actually having to think about that? Because
I think with someone like Thomas Frank is interesting because I think he's quite a flexible coach. But I remember in like previous seasons he would just go, okay, at home we're going to play, 3-4-3. Away we're going to play 3-4-3. At home we're going to play 4-3-3. And it was just the difference between those two formations that just then translated into I guess the play style. So I wonder if there's something like that going on, because I guess part of his strength is that he's gonna. So it was almost like for him, because he's treating home and away games as different. That's where the difference is coming in, rather than if he played in the same way, it would be maybe lessen the impact a little bit. I've not followed him as much this season in terms of what he's doing, so I don't know if that still holds true. But it definitely was the case at one point where they would just be like, we'll play more defensively away from home than we will at home.
The thing on the aways, though, right? This is the thing. Let me just read them out. Away games this season: Liverpool, Man City, Tottenham, Man United, Fulham, Everton, Villa. So even like Villa, Everton, and Fulham, who are probably like historically the least of those ones, are all incredible at home too.
Yeah.
They haven't had one where you're like, oh, well, that's an absolute disaster. That team, that should be away. Like, so that if they keep being strong at home, like one of the reasons why they've got so many points at home is because they've had easier games at home and they've had harder games away. That does create a disparity just in itself. Like, they're still a good team.
So then what do we make? So then if we're saying it's fixture rather than home away, then do we not look at like Chelsea being a tough fixture for them? But then we not look at like
Chelsea's not a tough fixture for attackers away.
It's not, no. But okay, fair enough. But then you've got Arsenal, City, and Liverpool all. I mean, City's probably not a disaster.
They've got to play all those guys.
They've got to play all those next 3 out of the next 4 home games against those guys. So we're now
so it just balances out.
Fixtures.
So rather than going, oh, they're this at home and this away, just balance out. That's what they are.
Okay, then then on that point, then are we not saying that Brentford players are not? I'm not saying a likely sell, but you'd more likely sell these players into these fixtures than to try and keep them just because they're good at home against the better teams. In this,
you would, but just don't forget the fact that Wissa is still a really good number 9 and scores a crap load of goals, and Bryan is on penalties and he's really, really good at them, and he's a really good player. But there's lots of really good players. But
that goal he scored against Newcastle, the opening goal, was just mad. It's just so good.
There's
so many coaches that I've seen who've been asked who are the most, the best, the most underrated players in the Premier League, and he comes up a lot. I know that Iraola. I saw an interview with Iraola the other day, and he was like, "Who's the best player that you've come across?" And he said, "Yeah, Bryan Mbeumo." He said, "You might not watch him on TV and think he's that special, but when you stood on the sideline and see what he's actually doing, it's super impressive."
Wissa's had some injuries and he's got more points than Bruno Fernandes this season, and everyone's telling me that Bruno Fernandes got 49 points in the last 6 weeks, but Wissa's still got more points than him, and Bruno's only got 2 points less than Haaland. Like, they're good picks.
Yeah,
you don't have to force them out.
They've got City at home. That's a tough fixture, but they'll score goals in that game, won't they?
You don't have to force them out. That's my point with them. Is great if you're in a luxury position.
John, you are the best at segues I've ever seen. Iraola mentioned. Iraola appears. It's a paddling.
Here we go.
The paddling. This is what you're here for.
It's a paddling when they've scored 2 goals in the last 5 minutes to win the game.
Bit of game
state. It's also worth saying that first big chance for Bournemouth was a ball flashed across the box from Kirkes that Muric got a hand to, flicked it a bit before Tavernier. It sort of bounced off Tavernier. So it wasn't really a big chance. And I think if you get rid of that, it drops all the way down until right at the end, when essentially like Ipswich are just being forced deeper and deeper because they're just defending deeper and deeper because they don't want to give up their lead. And it just made things a lot easier for Bournemouth to control the game. So yeah, it's one of those ones where, it's one of those games that I've been banging on about on Twitter for Bournemouth, where they come up against a team who actually don't get destabilized by a bit of chaos, and actually suits them for Bournemouth to play the way that they do, and it sort of came to bite them quite hard in this fixture. I thought up until like the first 30 minutes, like Ipswich basically dominated the game really. And yeah, like I say, I think the difficulty for a team like Ipswich is that you're so desperate to hold on to your lead by the end that you do just fall into a low block, and it just makes any Premier League team where you just fall into that low block for the last few minutes of a game. It means that you're going to face a barrage of chances, and all it has to take is for a bit of a stramash in the box, and yeah, chances occur. So, which is what happened basically for both of these goals. So, felt bad for Kieran McKenna on this one. But
I mean, also if you've got your keeper flying out to the corner of his box in places where there's you know, anyone will tell you there's very little danger. There's not, well, I don't say little danger, but there's not that much danger there when you've got players running alongside. That obviously is a massive issue in that particular situation. So they don't, whilst they don't really help themselves in some of the decision making.
I would I would put the boot in. John might not realise this because he's not as filthy nerdish as us in the FPL world. But are you aware, John, that McKenna doesn't put centre backs on the bench?
I'm not aware of this. No.
Yeah, this is the mad stuff where we're so insane on selection. So there's a thing about that he hasn't put a centre back on the bench. Now, I think last game or previous game,
he just rotate his centre backs a lot then.
So he's rotating. Obviously, Greaves had an injury, so he was off. But Greaves is back.
Has been back for a bit.
Greaves is back, and
O'Shea was not there, and then was there, and
yeah,
they were playing Wolfenden to start off the season.
But when you rotate, he then also just doesn't bother putting them on the pitch either, on the bench either. So.
So what happens if they get an injury? Do you know what happens in that?
Well, obviously they had Tuanzebe, so he would have come across. He's now injured, so I assumed they would then start putting centre backs on the bench. But Greaves didn't bother again.
I thought Tuanzebe was back. Like he nearly lost his thumb in some kind of freak washing up accident, right? But he's been back since then. Has he got injured again since then?
I think so. Yeah,
right,
I think so.
I guess it would make sense if he's out like cold turkey for a while. That when he came back, he would pick something up.
But Greaves started in midweek and then not even on the bench. Was warming up with the subs still, despite the fact that he wasn't on the bench.
That's pretty curious.
Very odd situation. And then guess what? You conceded 2 scrambles. Like it's a bit like we can't feel sorry for Ange because he's doing it to himself. It's a bit like this with McKenna. Like you're 1-0 up against Bournemouth. They're a really good team. Chuck another big boy in the mixer. like it.
He'd probably use one of those double substitutions, couldn't he? The old Amorim special. Get two sets of fresh legs in there to sort it out.
But lots of people like me have got Greaves because Greaves is basically as cheap as any person you can have in this entire game, as like a defender that you never ever want to play. But during Christmas, you need him. For those that are in the world where they've got people like me, like Greaves and Mikalenko, I'm now looking at keeping Mikalenko because at least he plays, and he has a double game week now that Liverpool Everton didn't play, because he's only 0.3 more than Greaves. I'm like, well, he's well worth 0.3 more than Greaves, and just leave him. And I'll replace Greaves instead of replacing Miko. You can't trust it.
So which players from Ipswich does everyone have? I've heard you mention Leif Davis, but
Leif Davis. Adam's got Leif Davis.
I've got him, but I didn't play him in the Leicester game when he got all his points, and then I haven't played him since, and he's got fuck all. So it's not fun.
He almost got some points for you.
He was so close, and then they didn't have any centre backs on the bench.
But that by itself, like I say, don't have any centre backs on the bench. Do stupid stuff. Have a keeper that do stuff. You can't trust that.
Yeah, you can't trust it. Yeah, exactly.
I think as well with Ipswich, they're definitely like an out of possession first sort of team. I think that's where McKenna's upside is. Like his out of possession approaches are often quite good. The problem is that like for them to work for 90 minutes requires a huge amount of energy, and so I think we're seeing them like drop off at the end of games as well. And as you can see from like the in possession stuff, despite the fact they dominated the first 30 minutes or so, they didn't create a huge amount of decent chances. So I sometimes worry that they're a little bit toothless in attack. But then you look at the squad and you kind of think, well, that's what he's sort of working with. It's tough. But yeah, I've been pretty impressed with McKenna in many respects. So but yeah, I would worry that that combination of if the upside is defensiveness, but they're always going to probably give away a goal or two. There's probably not much value to be had in that sort of team.
We're going to ask you about Semenyo. So there's quite a few people have already owned Semenyo. Huge number of people own Semenyo actually. But there's a few that've been complaining that he's been playing right back. I need to ask you about Kirkes because I also, as I said, I'm in the market for a cheap defender. Kirkes is probably Colwill or Hall is basically my options really at that sort of cheapo price. Kirkes interests me, but let's start with Semenyo.
Yeah, Semenyo started really hot this season, um, and it's well worth it. Definitely got to a point where people were talking about him in a sort of big team should sign this player kind of way. And I don't often go in for this, but I do feel as though since then he's dropped off a little bit, because I think he's one of these players who I think his upside comes from just running hard, working hard in and out of possession, and using his physicality to his advantage. And I think it's felt like whether or not it was weird. For example, he came back after a week out because he got 5 cards, I think, and was banned, and looked super lethargic in that game, which wasn't tracking back and helping out, which is one of the things that he does. So I don't know whether or not he's sort of carrying some kind of knock, or whether or not the off pitch stuff is sort of meant that he's just not playing into his strengths as much as he was, which is that's obviously anecdotal, but that's based on, I mean, I watch every Bournemouth game pretty much, and he's definitely hit a point when he was just became less valuable. Maybe it's just a run, but I've got him on my fantasy team, and at the beginning of the season was just getting me cash dollar, but like now, yeah, 2 pointers all the way. So an interesting one. Kirkez is an interesting one because he got 2 assists against City. So it's like the only time people are going to be watching Bournemouth. So everyone assumed, I think that was representative of what you get. But again, the problem with Bournemouth players is that the majority of them, their upside is physical rather than technical. So Kirkez is another player like that, right? Who will run up and down for a million years, the sidelines, and will put shifts in. But he's also like, for example, in the Wolves game, just completely sloppy defending led to Wolves' goal equaliser early on in that game, just because he wasn't getting tight enough to the wide player. I can't remember who it was actually who played it into Larson, who scored that goal. And he's also like, because he relies on his physicality, you often get him doing dumb stuff, because I think he realizes that he has to go aggressive, because if he doesn't, then sometimes he can lose out. So it's sort of very hit and miss for me, Kirkez. I'm a little bit mind boggled that so many people are talking about him for like big clubs like Liverpool. For some reason, there seems to be like that link there that their fans keep talking about. But I just think with Bournemouth, they're just always going to concede. I think
Well, I don't mind that really, to be honest, because
enough.
I've got Ain't Nuri in my team, I've got Mikalenko in my team, I'm looking at Lewis Hall, who always concede. Basically, I'm just a slut for left backs that like to concede. That's me.
So what are you looking for then? It's just assists? Is that what it is, or?
Oh, I don't know. I think when they're cheap, there's only so much you can get from them.
Yeah.
But I do. But minutes is definitely one of them. Is
Yeah, I mean, he's one of the few regular players, right? So I guess that comes into it.
Just always seems to be in the picture. Do you know what I mean? Not always. I mean, he had one good shot which he pulled across the front of it. I mean, they have a lot of shots. You can see this looking at the number of times it goes up. They have a lot of shots. But
I think relative to that, though, he doesn't have a huge amount of productivity.
No.
To be honest, I don't think Bournemouth use their fullbacks for creative purposes a lot of the time, right? A lot of it is going direct as soon as possible, and then sort of benefiting from the chaos that ensues, which means that most of the beneficiaries tend to be that central block of 4 players in the forward areas. So the striker, the 10, and the 2 wingers.
Yes.
So, but again, the problem with that is that there's so much rotation that goes on there.
It's hard to predict.
It's hard to know what to go for. But Evan Nielsen seems to be pretty productive, I guess, right now. Certainly wins a lot of penalties. I think he's picked up 5 penalties wins this season.
Yeah, isn't that?
Which it's
I think nobody else has got more than 1 or something like that.
No one else has got more. Nobody else has got more than 2, apart from someone's got 4. No. Someone's got 4 in, but not in the Premier League.
So it helps when you get 3 in one game.
Yeah, it does.
That is
it does.
True.
And Clive at the penalty taker, obviously people like him, and they could have had another penalty in this, but again, 63 minutes goes off again. You can't pick a player that's going off after 60 minutes every game.
Yeah. Same with Water, who's you've got on the screen there. He's presumably made quite a nice return this week, but he's
always productive. It's just he doesn't play.
Yeah. And there's a reason why he doesn't play, and I think part of that is because he is better coming on against tired legs and just being a bit chaotic. I wouldn't
The new
really want
Harvey
to see him
Barnes.
from, sort of form of Harvey Barnes. But yeah, I wouldn't. Sinistera is an interesting one, but I guess he's injured again,
Yeah,
which
yeah.
is the worry with him. But he was pretty good at the beginning of the season when he was fit, but like him coming on against tired legs is pretty dangerous as well. But again, it's like it's so rotational. Although having said that, this does feel like the most settled Bournemouth team that we've seen under Iraola, because you're basically looking, I think, Zabani plays every minute, and then
Yeah.
Senesi if he's fit. Although Huijsen's come in and been pretty good
I
recently.
like him.
Adam Smith, guaranteed starter now, despite the fact they brought in Araujo as a backup. He's just not been at the level at all. They've also got Max Aarons, but like again, he's just not physical enough for this kind of football. So yeah, Adam Smith just nailed on starter, and then Kepa's obviously starting every week, and then Kirkes is starting every week. So your back four is basically settled, apart from the question of whether or not Huijsen can upstage Senesi, which I doubt will happen because seniority, but that's pretty much settled. And then it's Lewis Cook if he's available, plus maybe Adams now that he's back fit, but it will be either him or Christie depending on the opponent if you want to be a little bit more gregarious as a team. And then it's Kluivert starting 10 all the time now. Semenyo is always starting. Tavernier seems to be always starting. And Evan Nielsen. So it's as settled as it's been
settled.
for some time. But before, I think they were trying to like balance a lot of players who are quite injury prone. So had Scott, what's his name? Scott. Is that his name? Adam Scott?
Alex Scott.
What's Scott's name? Alex Scott.
I like it.
Yeah. And then Sinistera, who we've already mentioned. These are both players who have to be super managed, right? But both offer quite a lot of upside. So I think as a result of that, they've been quite rotational with the players, and been able to get away with it. Whereas I think the problem now is they just have to play who they've got, because again, it is a really physical system. Interestingly enough, they did this game week where they had 3 games in 7. They looked pretty washed at times against Ipswich after that run. So it's definitely a team where if they got Europe, you'd be like, wait a minute, is this gonna come to bite them?
They might play out over Christmas as well.
Yeah, that's true. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on that as well, because they've lost that rotational option, because actually they've got quite a deep bench if all of their semi-injured play. At one point, like maybe 2 months ago, they just had no injuries. And I remember the guys at work being like, oh, isn't it great? We should do something on Bournemouth not having any injuries. And I made the point, it's quite impressive because they've actually targeted players who are injury prone or even injured when they bought them. So they bought Alex Scott when he had that ACL injury from Bristol Rovers, City, Bristol, whichever,
City.
the bigger one, City. They brought in Tyler Adams, who was injury prone and I think was maybe potentially injured at that point as well. Sinistera also. And to be fair, like Sinistera, they were managing him so well. He got injured on international duty, I think. It tends to be the way that it goes. So they've clearly got some smart guys behind the scenes who are like big on the medicine side, and they're looking for added value for players who I think maybe aren't as valuable, but considered as valuable in the market because of injuries, and they're trying to find ways of actually making them functional. But now it's obviously bitten them hard because loads of their players are now not available or injured. So
What we've got left?
We've got
City and Brighton.
We've got City, Brighton, and Villa. We've still got 3 games to go. It's taken us an hour and 25 minutes to do 5 games.
Oh God!
Sorry,
mate, if we were...
guys. This is definitely my fault. You got me on Bournemouth then, and I've just gone through that whole team.
You literally
City
went
aren't
through
that
the entire
interested.
squad.
Yeah, I did. I'm sorry about that. No one else is going to talk about Bournemouth, so consider it an education, right?
It's all good.
But are they going to talk about Will Hughes? That's the question. I've watched your stuff, John, on quick breaks with Man City and being much more susceptible with them. I do feel like a little bit with Will Hughes. It was like the old the old FIFA L1 and triangle, and just bang it over the top. That's literally all he was doing. It was literally just get the ball, just bang it over the top. Yeah. And that's how comes he created so many chances, because it was just like, yep, put it through. Obviously the Munoz goal is exactly that, where it's just like, okay, we've got it, 1 ball through, Munoz gets on the end of it. Obviously, now he's scored. He can score all the time now.
Yeah. They're just susceptible, right? The counter press is just frankly dog shit at the moment. And to counter that, what they're doing is they're pushing their high line even higher because
Yeah.
I think they want to get even more compaction to try and make it easier for them to get the distances right in that counter press. But the problem is, like, there's a couple of problems. One is that they just don't have the physicality to do the kind of counter pressing they need to make their system sustainable. Which means this is a problem. Like, in many respects, the City issues are just basic, really basic. It's like they've got to get better physical profiles in those positions. You cannot run a midfield of De Bruyne, Silva, Gundogan at this point in their careers and in the Premier League. But the other thing is they're slightly worse in possession as well, which I think means they're playing a little bit more directly potentially. And as a result of that, what often happens is when you lose the ball, then, which you're more likely to do anyway if you're playing more directly, but it means your structure isn't particularly well set up to be able to have the distances right for a counter press anyway. And then you have this sort of snowball effect because you have these players who aren't physically able to counter press, having to cover bigger distances, which means when they're arriving at the ball, if they arrive at all because of the physicality / larger distances, a lot of their actual defensive engagements aren't particularly good. So I think we saw that in the first goal when basically what happens is Gundogan, they're in this scenario where they can get the ball. Gundogan looks to get it down the line, I think makes a mistake, but ends up just sort of hooking it back into the middle, which is where he should be defending. And so you just end up with Bernardo Silva just on his own. Gundogan does eventually get back across there to help out, but because he's come such a big distance, he just sort of arrives a little bit with a little bit of momentum, which I think always makes it a lot easier to deal with if you're the player on the ball. So he does get a foot on the ball, but then it just pings out, and because the structure is not well set up, it just falls perfectly to Will Hughes, who then just immediately chunks one in at the back post. But like the issue again, like it's the same. It's the usual suspects. Like it's like Kyle Walker, suspect positioning. Gundogan not physically able to counter press, has lost mobility, so his first touch is like suffering, etc. Gvardiol decision making issues. Nunes being used in a Nunes, I should say, being used in a.
Oh, we're Nunes now. I noticed that now. We're now Nunes.
Well, I think so. I mean, he's Portuguese, isn't he? And that's how they say it. So, well, they don't say that. Basically, if you're pronouncing Portuguese, you're pronouncing it wrong. But yeah, he's being played out of position, quote unquote, whatever that means. But the game this game in particular, I thought like City were working really hard to generate like positional advantages around him, but then you end up with these scenarios where you're able to isolate him 1v1 against a fullback, and he just doesn't have anything to offer. And I'm just kind of like, why go to all of this effort, structuring your team to cause all of these tensions for the opposition when they're defending, get Nunes into a good position, and then it just sort of falls down. And so I think basically everything is falling down because Pep is having to second guess himself on everything, and the system is so cyclically tight with everything having to work out so that everything functions. So your possession is good, so that means you have high possession, good territorial possession. You don't lose the ball very much, but when you do, you're nicely structured to be able to counter press. And when your counter press doesn't work, you have the players who can defend the big spaces in the defensive transition. Everything doesn't work now, so they're less able to possess the ball well. The structure is worse then when they lose the ball. They're not able to counter press anyway, and then in those defensive transition moments, they're washed. So the tight circle of logic that has been the elite way of playing football at the top level for so many years now just looks like it's completely done away with. But I think it's just player profiles. They've let the squad run down, and now they're suffering the consequences of that. So. Yeah.
When you came on last, I think you said something like, well, I assume everybody's got Erling Haaland. Assume everybody's got him, type stuff. Now there's not a lot of people that have got him. There's about 30% of the game that still have him, which is not a lot for
I mean, at the beginning, you needed him, right? You were just getting left behind, right?
Yeah.
Or
some people will survive because Salah's covered it basically every game.
True.
But they've got some better fixtures coming up soon. But you have to break your team up to go back to him.
Has he decreased in value a lot?
Not a lot. He's going down, but he's still comfortably the most expensive player in the game.
Surely you've got to ride Salah on this hot spell.
You got to ride Salah. You got to ride Palmer.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess Saka's the interesting one, isn't it? What we're looking at earlier is like maybe Saka should play away, but you still got to find another 5 million on top of Saka just to get him.
Yeah, right. So Saka is that much cheaper than those?
Saka and Palmer's now 11 million.
Yeah, because he must have started out quite cheap, right?
No,
Relatively.
Well, he
Seven
was
and a half.
last year. He was, but he's still 10 and a half. He's still there's Palmer, Saka, and Son and De Bruyne and Foden are all like around 10 million quid. Obviously, the City guys are just going
Yeah.
down.
I think City players are just risky right at the moment. It's
Yeah.
yes, they're going to win some games. Yes, they're probably going to score in games because they are generating. Like their chance creation just hasn't really fluctuated hugely from where they were last season. It's the defensive numbers that have just gone wild. So
I think the interesting one is that Haaland scores in this, and you kind of assume in this he's the only striker that scores in this game, isn't he?
you get bonus points.
You get the bonus points, and he only gets one bonus.
Right.
And it's because, like, if they're going to concede 2 goals every game, or they're going to concede every game, it just brings the opposition. You know,
Yeah.
Adam, when
Especially
we've done
because
the
it's
bonus
like
point
you're saying.
stuff,
You're
they
saying Will
used to
Hughes
get
is
them
just
all.
spamming stuff, like spamming balls in behind, right?
Yeah,
And I guess that's the problem with this approach is that it feels the tactics are so easy to play against if you know that the issue isn't like the intelligence required to understand how to cause City problems. The issue is being able to cause City problems, right? And so I think
Yeah.
a big part of this is that as soon as the system goes badly, every team in the Premier League is well set up to be able to hurt them, right? Because it's about having press-resistant players who can avoid the counter-press, and then players who can then play those balls in behind to other players who are good in transitional moments. Every Premier League team has those kind of players. And so the reason why I think they're getting cooked so much is because that's it. The reason why teams can't beat them is because teams cannot beat the tactics. As soon as the tactical edge is gone, everyone can cause them problems. And so I think what we'll start seeing is just, maybe more of that, like teams being able to spam things that are going to get their certain players like bonus points.
and people will chance their arm more for it. So Munoz's chances aren't for it. We heard James Maddison say in the Tottenham game, he was like, if you can come inside, just swing it in, and I will go through. Like, and he did. Like, teams are starting to go, well, we know what's going to happen here.
They've lost their quote unquote aura, right? That's part of it.
Yeah, I'm standing by.
Yeah, I think as we've said before, from a Haaland perspective, it's not really the thing is you can risk taking on Haaland because you're risking basically taking on one person. Whereas when you have Haaland, generally you'll be sacrificing someone somewhere else, maybe a couple of positions. So if you don't have Haaland and he scores 13 points, it's painful. But if you don't have Saka and Palmer and they score 13 points each, then it's worse.
Yeah.
So
you can spread the risk way easier when you don't have Haaland, basically, right?
That's the game.
Yeah. That's the game. 2 more. Leicester Brighton.
Is Jamie Vardy a pick?
I mean,
is he cheap?
Yeah, he's like
Real
5
cheap.
mil. 5 mil. He's really cheap.
He's really cheap.
I mean, he's pretty valuable in our crazy draft game.
Yeah. Obviously, they're not under Rude. Like, we've immediately said under Rude, what we've immediately seen is, it's going to be fun. You want the attackers against them. You definitely want the attackers against them. But I'm like, they're still trying. And he's still going. Like, the pass, even that alone.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
That feels so mature as well. Like, I know he's like 37 or whatever, but I think even last year he doesn't pass that.
He was close to a number. There was that one where he had the shot which went off the defender and somehow they still gave it as a goal kick. I couldn't really understand that one. But there was a number of chances he had in this game where I was like, blimey, he was just good. And they look fun.
You've talked about like Mitoma being like the statesman in sort of the Brighton side. I think Rude has got to put a lot of trust in Vardy because he has got a lot of inexperienced players in that squad, and Vardy is like he's the only one left from the title winning team, isn't he? Must
Yeah,
be.
yeah.
So, you know, he needs someone that's going to bring all of them together, even if they're not great.
I think
You always feel he's going to be around it. He's definitely on pens. Like, we know that. It's absolute guaranteed.
But one of the things was it was only getting like a shot volume of like one shot a game in the old world with Steve Cooper. It was like one shot a game. Sometimes he scores it, sometimes he doesn't. But he's only getting one shot a game. This one, volume's up.
If you go for a cheap striker like Vardy, what's the sort of gameplay? Do you then you're just going for a midfield value then rather than
you can have Saka, Palmer, Sattler, and maybe Bruno. He opens up a Bruno. He opens up Trent. You know, there's a lot of people obviously with Cunha and Wolves fixtures are getting worse, but you can save a good $1 and a bit million. It gets you maybe double Arsenal defence if you need it. It gets you those bigger positions in those other games.
Do FPL players gamble on like new managers coming in? Because I'm guessing like Wolves.
Oh, we love a bounce.
We love a bounce.
So
we love a haircut, mate. If someone has a haircut, like we're there.
I think this is what the Kirkes thing's all about, because you notice he had that.
I like his hair, the mullet. I fucking love that mullet.
I was fuming about the Morgan Rogers.
Yeah.
Minute, but Morgan Rogers does that, and I bench him without knowing that he's changed.
Bleaches his hair,
scores a worldie.
That's the way.
I've gone in for El Canous on my.
Yeah, he looks
draft.
good.
Looks good, and I think, you know, again, like you said, it's going to be chaotic, so maybe he'll be a high production return. But so for anyone with a FPL draft where you're only doing bottom half teams,
guys, you need one or two.
They're getting all of the tips and insights for me today on narrow FPL draft.
I've got an eye on Vardy, and also again for me that other bit about that Lewis Hall bit, I'm like. Not so sure. I'd have been. This was a nailed on clean for Newcastle next week. I'm not so sure it is anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Brighton.
I think Mitoma, João Pedro, players that I have had nothing past halfway at all.
But they should have been home and dry in that first half.
They should have been clear. Mitoma had a great chance.
What was Ferguson doing passing that, by the way, to Mitoma?
I don't know. I couldn't believe he did that.
I'm not hitting my left. Doing it. I'm not hitting my left. You can have that.
Yeah.
I feel that almost put Mitoma off. Like...
He was just confused. I don't know. I mean...
I was contemplating a Stupinan, but before this happened again, and it just reminds me all the time. Brian don't like clean sheets.
No, but then Hermanson. I mean, like in this game anyway, Hermanson's a good keeper, isn't he? Like he's a very good keeper. But I've got no issues having them. Like João Pedro's minutes are a problem. That's obviously a problem. I didn't expect them to start with Ferguson. I don't think anyone did. I think everyone sort of thought that João Pedro would sort of lead the line here and. He would have
Welbeck was back on the bench, so that's
exactly.
So João Pedro's back to 10, basically.
Which don't mind, I guess, if Welbeck plays, if Welbeck starts.
Don't mind.
But
they're good. If you've got Brighton guys, they're good, but I'm not sure they're buys.
They're also like another rotation team, right? I guess everyone is now to an extent, but like when you look at the wide options they've got. I mean, Mitoma seems to be like a nailed-on starter, but then in the other option, they can play Reter, they've got Brian Gruder, haven't they? They've got Yankuba Minte, they've got Adingra. Like, there's so many options that they can have.
Yeah.
I say him up front, I suppose, from what you're saying. But even in the centre midfield slot, they just rotate around. When Hinchelwood's available, he can play. They've got Baleba, they've got O'Reilly. They played a Yari. Vifa. They've got so many options. So yeah.
Weaver was given that assist, by the way. I don't know whether you saw that, Baker.
What, for the Minter goal?
For the Minter goal, yeah. Yeah, they didn't give it to him initially, but they went back and gave it to him today.
I mean, he did take about 14 touches before he put the ball in the net afterwards.
Yeah, the thing about FPL is if there's a defender makes a significant touch on the ball and the player loses possession, then it's taken away. There's no assist. But it didn't look like he ever lost possession of that. It's a great finish. I mean, did I say it on Thursday? Like, where was he? Like, where has he been?
Yeah.
And there he is.
He's been around.
There he is. He's ready. He's there. He scores. And then, yeah, just a calamity at the end, unfortunately for them.
Keeping an eye on Jamie Vardy.
Okay. I think it's just terrible for Leicester, though. I mean, it's like I think you have to partner that with a move elsewhere. I don't think it's ever going to feel right entering into a Vardy pick as a.
But maybe you can sort of rotate. I'll have a look at Vardy and maybe Vardy and Rodgers as a rotation of play one or the other. But Villa, I mean, the other English striker. I mean, a lot of people captained Ollie Watkins, brought him in for this.
Well, we thought it'd be a good
big
pick.
Boy game.
We thought it would be a good pick, and I think there was reason to think that. A good reason.
But there was always the case. It was one of the things that, because I said it was on my mind of, do I bring him in? But that Tuesday game in Europe was like, well, it's always going to be relatively limited minutes, despite the fact that even the limited minutes that Watkins played, he could have had a hatful.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seems like there's been a lot of very high XG games. Am I wrong? It's almost every game had someone over 2 XG.
Yeah.
Seems nuts to me.
But that's recently. I think also when we have multiple games in a week, as it were, in the Premier League, just defending just goes to trash. I mean, even more so. There's not many cleans nowadays. There's not many cleans.
I mean, like Rodgers was definitely more creative in this game than I've seen him. He obviously has the one shot, but definitely acting more as a creator. I don't know whether he feels more comfortable with Duran on the pitch or whether it's Watkins. I don't know where the better relationship is. Probably with Watkins.
I mean, he is a creator though, isn't he? Like he doesn't have many high XG chances. The goal he scored, like when you look at the goals he scored, deflection, worldies, like there hasn't been many. Like obviously the probably the highest amount of XG he had was the goal against Tottenham where he stabbed in a corner from 1 yard. That'd be a massive, addition to his XG for the season. But in general, he's always involved. It's a bit like Eze. Do you know what I mean? He's like a cheaper version of Eze without the set pieces, and that carries the ball well. Should get more assists than he does, but sometimes that's the finishing of the partners he's with. Even if the volume's there, it's relatively low XG a lot of the times. He's still cheap.
It's been a bit funny this season for FPL in that I guess everyone was pretty high on them going into the season, and presumably people are dropping off as time goes by.
Yeah, people just unable to try. Obviously, they've just had obviously 2 games where the opponents basically haven't taken shots, so that's
fucking
helpful.
hate Emi Martinez.
Adam took out Emi Martinez for Bob Sanchez because he broke his finger, and then he played it a day later.
And Sanchez didn't.
Emi Martinez did an Instagram post. See, again, this is part of our stalking thing. Did an Instagram post of him in hospital with like his daughter with a picture of his hand.
Hand with one of those with a
cannula.
Cannula, that's it. Yeah.
And then so Adam was like, "Well,
I've seen
I better get
your
out."
scary stalking activities.
Oh yeah,
I remember a long weekend it must have been with Bukayo Saka's toilet bag or something.
Yeah, I went searching for his rucksacks. Yeah, I did that. Yeah.
It's
One of the guys, a friend of ours, Andy, went to the hotel to stand next to the sign so that we could try and work out if the silhouette was Saka or not based on his height. That's what we go to.
Yeah, that's certainly a choice.
It's a big Friday. It's a big Friday.
I mean, I do similar things, but in the comfort of my own home. Like I'll watch
Stand next to
the
signs.
back. Well, I'll watch the back line of a team in a match replay to see the back line behaviours, which is, I suppose boring and sad, but I can do that from the comfort of my own home, so I feel less bad about it, right? Going to find a sign by a stadium and then working out how tall it is quite something.
Oh, it wasn't the stadium, it was the hotel. It was the hotel they were
Oh, it
staying
was the
in
hotel,
night
right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
Yeah.
Yes.
Special breed.
Even more stalky when you go to the hotel you're staying at.
Special breed. Right.
Well,
No,
welcome
all
to
of
the
the
world
teams.
of
We've
FPL.
done all. We've done all of it.
We've done all
We've
of
completed it.
We've completed it, mate. Yeah.
We only had 8
There's-
games.
There's 2 games
We-
fewer than we should have done as well. Yeah, that's what I was thinking. I was like, I've been smart here. I've gone for a week where they're only talking about 8 games.
This
will
is
be
the
over.
this is the longest
This will be
podcast
over
we've done all
super-
season. No, it's not right. Not quite. It's getting there. It's close. Thank you to everyone that's joined us, by the way. Everyone on YouTube, everyone on X, etc., etc. If you're on YouTube and you haven't hit the like button and you did enjoy the chat, then please do hit like on the video. And if you want to see more from us, make sure you hit subscribe. It's always fantastic hearing John's thoughts. Working in the industry.
What's on the docket this week, John?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just saying, your fans are much more polite than what I'm used to on YouTube. I'm usually getting all sorts of abuse, but I'm not, just scrolling through the chat now, and there's not been much abuse at all. So
You're lucky, John, that there's no Liverpool this week for you.
yeah, that's true.
They're not your friends.
I stand by what I said about Liverpool. But yeah, they're impressive. I'm doing a piece at the moment on Slot and why.
Oh, you're trying to get back in favour.
Well, look, you know that public sphere is not a place for nuance these days. But yeah, I'm doing a piece. We're just doing a video on the fact that a lot of teams who win titles often get remembered. Those seasons often get remembered for the team who didn't win. So thinking about how when Leicester won the season, a lot of people were like, "Yeah, well, it was because Spurs stacked it." Sorry to remind you guys of that particular period of history. And yeah, I guess often what comes with someone winning is the suggestion that they only did so because other teams stacked it, essentially. So we're sort of starting from that premise and mentioning a few of those teams, and then saying that this is why it would be unfair to suggest that Liverpool somehow got a lucky title. So I mean, I've just been talking about some of the big picture stuff, and like I think there's definitely no. I think 2 things can be true, right? One of them is that Liverpool are very well coached, and that very quickly Slot has turned things around for Liverpool in an impressive way, because it's not just that, there's a lot of overlap between what he does and what Jurgen Klopp did with them. So there was a lot of the basics in place. But I think as soon as you start introducing these sorts of newer ideas about tempo that Liverpool use now, you're introducing an element which is, 1, very hard to coach, and 2, he's done it in a very short space of time as well. Not to mention, on top of that, impressive tactical tweaks in game. So yeah, basically I'm giving the argument that Liverpool very well coached, and they very much deserve to win the league if they should go through and win it. But at the same time, I do think if City were in their pomp, if Arsenal hadn't gone the way that they've gone, and we talked about earlier, then I think they would be under a little bit more pressure for that title. So it would, it's funny because I think if you look at a lot of the numbers, Liverpool last season are pretty similar to where Liverpool are this season in a lot of respects. The difference is that against the background of the battle between City and Arsenal, people were just like, oh, Liverpool aren't really quite at the same level. And in the end, they fell away. So it was just like, well, it was a naive way of playing or whatever. Whereas I think you could make the argument the same thing could happen this season, but because they'll be so far ahead, it will be touted as like, this is incredible management. So yeah, whenever I do any analysis, I'm not seeking to be disparaging of the team. I'm just simply often looking for the weaknesses that exist in a team's setup, and I think that acknowledging that Liverpool have some weaknesses out of possession is hardly rocket science. I think their manager comes out often and suggests the same.
Well, that's why actually some of the impressive stuff is that the adjustments he's made and stuff is because he's seen how the out of possession stuff hasn't quite worked.
Yeah, and he's been able to evolve, and that's to bring us back to where we started, and Ange Postecoglou. That's the sign of a manager who can really succeed at the highest level, is the ability to which they can evolve when they need to. And I think Slot's definitely shown that he can do that. So yeah, I've been hugely impressed with him. I just don't think that Liverpool are the finished product, but I don't think any team are the finished product at this point in a manager's cycle. I think the most great teams take at least 2 seasons to get to a level where they can start being great. So I think that maybe what people are getting offended at is is that I'm sort of suggesting that there's still space for improvement. But for me, that's like the highest praise I could give, that there's space for improvement, and I think that he is a guy who could potentially get them there. So
yeah, great,
awesome. So yeah, I think that does it for game week 15.
A question in the chat from you, Gam. For people that don't know, where can they find your work, John?
Yeah, so most of my stuff is done under the auspices of The Athletic, more specifically The Athletic's video department. So it goes out on our social feeds under The Athletic FC. But I'm also on Twitter and Blue Sky. My Twitter account is at John_Mackenzie. I have no idea what my Blue Sky thing is because it's very long. Similar. It's like John Mackenzie .bluesky.social, I think it might be.
Yeah.
And I put most of my stuff up there. I do a thread every Monday, which is like the biggest thing I put out, and that goes out as a video as well. So if you're interested in like a tactical overview of one of the games from the weekend, 60-second video, which isn't a huge amount. If you want to go deeper, there is a thread on Twitter which sort of digs into the details a bit more.
Beautiful, John. Thanks again, as always. Baker, I will speak to you a little bit later in the week. Thanks everyone for watching. See you later. Cheers, guys.